welcome to the first post-COVID Healthy Beast podcast, and I'm joined by a psychiatrist to help us get some insight into the possible effects of all this lockdown and everything, and the psychiatrist Dr Donald Holt, the name isn't a coincidence, also happens to be my dear father. Welcome, Dad.
You're welcome.
First question, I do want to ask you some professional questions, but the first question is, did my wife bully you into doing this podcast?
Yes.
I thought so. Well, that's welcome to my world then. But you know, if
this was no surprise.
No, but if I'd asked, you'd never have done it. So
I think that's not true, but I take the point.
Yeah, you know, she pushes me into doing things that I don't like it at the time, but I'm always generally glad of it afterwards.
But your wife and my wife have quite a lot in common, so I know the breed.
I think they're of the opinion that if they didn't push us into doing things, we wouldn't do anything.
Yes, and it's a reasonable opinion.
Grudgingly, I can see their point. But anyway,
we're here.
Yeah, we're here anyway. We've spent months being shut away in our houses.
Yes. Nearly 3 months.
Nearly 3 months, which, if you don't mind me saying, you're 78
yes.
now.
Well done.
You don't remember the war, but you were born during it. But I think it's right to say that this is unprecedented, right?
Yes, and I rather resent the comparators because there are some ways in which warfare was much easier because you always had the capacity to go to the cinema or church or gatherings in the war, whereas this time you haven't been able to see people.
Yeah, because what you learn about the war, it was quite a nice time.
Yes, there's a sort of camaraderie that sustained people, whereas now the isolation is the worst bit.
I was just saying on the way in here, we had the experience. I was out with the family yesterday, and an older lady that we passed. We were at least 3 or 4 metres from her already, but she kind of turned away and put her head into the hedge, and I don't understand why she's doing it. She was 90 if she was a day, so she's probably in the most vulnerable of groups, and you can understand. But the psychological effects of how we see each other is a really weird thing that I think we haven't yet understood the effects of, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about a bit, because this thing that we can't really see going back, where your first thought when you see another person is this person dangerous to me or to my family, which is a really weird way to look at everybody.
But yeah, I agree with you, but there's been a sort of counter movement, because I've never known people be so smiley and polite as they are at the moment. We go for a walk every day through the park, and normally you don't engage with strangers at all. But now you almost never fail to acknowledge them with an eyebrow lift or a smile or good afternoon. It's a big change.
So do you think there's a chance that good could come of it in some ways?
Well, people keep saying when things get back to normal. I think they won't quite get back to normal, and I think one of the lasting things is this tendency to avoid strangers or even family. I personally would be quite glad of the fact that I no longer feel obligated to hug vague members of my acquaintance the way that we have been doing, because it seems to me to be continental behaviour.
All this hugging.
Yeah, I can do without kissing perfect strangers.
I don't think you should really be obliged to touch and kiss people you don't want to touch and kiss. I mean, I thought that before.
Well, I did too, but it was increasingly difficult to avoid without giving offence. In my upbringing, I had 2 distinct sides of the family. My father's side were very huggy, kissy, contacty, and my mother's side were very austere. And I hated the father's side because I seemed to have lots of hairy-faced old aunts that I was obliged to kiss, and it was a repulsive experience. So it's nice to think we don't have to do that anymore.
I think you want to be able to have contact with people you want to have contact with, don't you? You don't want to be pushed.
Also, there's a sort of continental drift, as it were, because it started off with, one air kiss of a cheek, and then it get to be both cheeks, and there are 3s and 4s happening before this rescued us.
Rescued us. You're the first person I've heard calling it that. Rescued us for all all this continental stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I spent a lot of time in Switzerland, and most of them are 3 kisses there,
Mm.
and that's, for an Englishman travelling, it's all a bit much.
But one of the things that also has changed, and I really don't know whether this was just my family or whether it was general, people kissed on the lips in those
What?
days. Truly.
Well,
Because I
what
remember...
cult was this you grew up in? Who's kissing on the lips?
This is northeast of England. I promise you, if you turned your cheek, people used to say, don't turn your cheek.
Really?
Yeah, you kiss people on the lips, and it wasn't always a lovely experience.
Oh, I did not know
I had
about
one
this.
particularly luscious cousin, and I enjoyed kissing her. Everybody else, forget it.
I didn't know about this. So you're blaming the continentals. Maybe it's the northerners
Well,
we need to worry
Well, my
about.
parents were born and brought up within, 30 miles of each other, but they just came from different cultures.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, the only good thing I think we've learned is sneezing in the elbow, which the Italians have been doing for years, rather than sneezing on your hands and then.
Or just into the open air.
But I was reminded. I thought about this the other day. I remember a man who had a child, and I saw him. This was before COVID, and I saw him wipe his child's nose with his finger and thumb. Wipe the snot off. Wipe the hand on the back of his jeans, and then offer me the hand, all in like 3-stroke, white hand, and I'm like, I saw you do that.
Yeah.
You can't.
I think a kiss on the lips would have been
I'd have
better
preferred
than-
to kiss him on the lips, to be honest. Yeah, on balance. Back to your job, psychiatrist. So you were a child psychiatrist. Well, I say were because you retired, but along with lots of other retired medical professions, you've been asked if you'd be prepared to work again.
Yes, it was more strong than that. I deliberately resigned all of my medical qualifications. The only difference is if you pay a retainer, you can stay on the books, but I didn't see any value in that. It just seemed to be a waste of money, so I let it all go. And then we more or less got a government mandate saying that we had been reinstated, and it did say we could opt out of it if we wanted to.
Okay, so the assumption that you.
The presumption that was that you'd agree.
And for you, this came, I guess, a few weeks into the lockdown. Or
Yeah,
something
just
like
a
that.
few weeks into that, and it came as such a surprise as when I said it to my dear wife. She said, "My God, they must be desperate."
That loyal support as ever.
Yeah. And I initially, well, she thought it was a scam. She thought it was a joke. But I checked up with colleagues, and quite a number of us had them. And if I'd been a surgeon, long retired, I think it would have been inappropriate, because who wants a retired surgeon? But psychiatry, because there was likely to be a big demand because of the knock-on effects of the COVID. I did say yes, because obviously there wouldn't be any face-to-face contact with patients, but I would be happy to work in an advisory capacity.
Were you pleased to get that call?
Yes, I think I was.
Because how long had you been completely retired by?
Well, I
point?
didn't retire completely until I was 73, so only 5 years.
But still.
I mean, I officially retired when I was 55 for historical reasons, because psychiatrists just did. But I continued to work until I was well into my 70s.
So 5 years ago, had you regretted it a bit?
Well, I did. I didn't want to retire at all because I loved the job so much. It was my practice then was largely medico-legal, and medico-legal is an extremely rewarding branch of medicine.
So for the listener, that's when you're going to court.
Yeah, representing children's interest in court.
Yeah, so my child might be between two warring parents or something like this.
Yes, or a child might be mentally ill, or orphaned, or one of the many tragedies that befall childhood.
So you regret
Well,
slightly
I continued to have just 2 sessions a week in the National Health Service, as it were, just to balance my practice, because I didn't want it all to be court work. But I stopped at 73 just because 10 years previously a judge in court had said that he wanted another 10 years' work on a particular case, and I rather glibly said, fine, I'll do that, and I was 63 at the time. So I'd said to the family I will retire when I was 73, and I did. And although I missed it badly, I think in a way it was time to go, if only because judges have to retire at 70, and I didn't particularly like being older than the judges.
Particularly when judges are known for being
Doddering.
a bit old, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think people do lose their age. I mean, I wasn't conscious of losing my age, but I feared that other people might be.
Well, judging you because of your age, you mean?
No,
Sorry.
because one's opinions stop developing in time, and I was occasionally conscious of thinking along tram lines instead of accepting each new case completely afresh. I was over-categorizing some of them.
So your opinions stopped developing, is that what you said?
That's what I feared, yes. Nobody ever said that to me, but it's one of the hazards.
People get to a certain age and they don't take in new information, is that what you mean?
It's partly that, and it's partly because the longer one's in psychiatric practice, the more the things that you've learned become more and more manifestly untrue. Even such grand categories as the simple division, which any junior doctor can tell you, between schizophrenia and manic depression. The more you practice, the more you realise that they're like Venn diagrams, that there's a huge overlap between them.
So they define separately, but there's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's easier if you can put people into very simple categories, but you have to acknowledge the fact after a while that the categories just actually aren't that simple.
Are there things you learned when you were training in the 60s? So are there things you learned then that are just completely untrue now? No,
I mean, in some specialties, if you're a surgeon, for instance, you constantly have to go into new fields. You know, when I first qualified, surgery was all opening people's abdomens wide and dealing with the difficulties inside, but almost entirely now it's done through keyholes and microscopes, and so. But that major change in practice doesn't happen in psychiatry. I mean, if anything, psychiatry tends to go around in a 30-year cycle, and things are discovered, are over-practiced, fall into abeyance, and then are rediscovered. It's not a very becoming aspect of the work, but that's the truth.
Did you find it sort of sits separately from the rest of the doctors, the psychiatry? Is it?
Well, less so than. I mean, a lot of people say, "Are you a doctor or a psychiatrist?" as if they're separate things, and it's a bit offensive to people who've actually had to do medicine before they do psychiatry. It's one of those professions that the portrayal of it in popular culture is terrible, isn't it? It's always the kind of it has the piss taken out of it. You know, we just watched 40 Towers with the kids, and there's a whole episode about the psychiatrist, and Basil's terrified of him, and there's a whole episode of Friends where one of them dates a psychiatrist and he ends up mocking them for sucking on the teats of these large coffees they're drinking and stuff. All this sort of... Well, I have to say, I say this with some pain, that psychiatrists en masse are a pretty weird bunch of people.
Are they?
Yeah. At the first psychiatric conference I went to, I thought, I don't want to join this club.
You were already one, or you?
I was well on the way to it.
On the way to being one.
I suddenly thought, because originally I wanted to do surgery, and started in surgery and found it just awful, so boring.
Because surgery, you really do end up doing the same thing all the time.
Well,
right? Because you get good at something.
You do now, yes. I mean, I remember my father saying that he was a hospital manager, and one of his surgeons had a book propped open, you know, on a bit of the patient, and he would sort of say to the theatre nurse, "Turn over the page," and you know, it was probably the best the patients could have at the time, but people were doing it at such an amateur level. It was frightening to think about. And even when I first started, you know, you could operate on somebody's abdomen in the morning and then their lungs in the afternoon, and then, you know, take a leg off in the evening. Whereas now it's so specialised that people just do the same operation all day, and they get terribly good at it, which is super for the patients. But can you imagine that being your life?
Have I invented it that that not only do you just get good at doing ankles, you just get good at doing right ankles. Is that is it almost that specialised?
It jolly nearly is, yes. That old joke about a naval surgeon. Gosh, how you chaps do specialise.
Yeah. I remember you used to say a thing about you wouldn't do it if it wasn't for the money. You used to say, which I think everyone feels like about their job at some point. But it's at this point of your life, you're looking back on it with a lot of fondness. Is that?
Well, I think it's true to say I always absolutely loved it. It was just a wonderful thing to go to work every day, because the kids were fascinating and their parents were interesting. There was nothing about it that I didn't like. But in a sense, when I officially retired at 55, I'd done enough of everyday NHS clinics. It was becoming a bit sort of, I've seen everything now. Yeah. So when my career then became largely medico-legal, and that gave added satisfaction because it's a nationwide thing. So I would be driving around the country interviewing people in their own homes instead of in a clinic, and always seeing their parents, and then writing the reports, and then going to court if required. So there was a lot to that job, and there was none of it. Well, the exception was I found it difficult to set the cases up.
Right.
But once they were set up, there was nothing about it I didn't enjoy. I even liked driving around the country.
Was it ever psychologically difficult for you if it was, kids in a terrible situation where that was only so much you can do about it? There were limits, I guess, to how many people you can help. And did you ever find that?
There are limits, but it isn't as upsetting as, say, I spent a little time doing brain surgery when I was a junior, and at the time we had a ward that was largely stocked with young men who'd come off their motorcycles and didn't have crash helmets on, and just a lot of them ended up either vegetables or dead, and there's a huge emotional toll if you have a job like that.
Well, I had a guy on the podcast a couple of times, Dr. Mark Barton, and he was an A&E doctor, and he said that after a while, and particularly when he had kids, just every day seeing these horrific injuries and people dying and awful things like that, he said after a while, his colleagues would either turn to drink to cope with the stress, or they would have to find some other outlet. He ended up finding a healthy outlet, which is jiu-jitsu, and actually ended up becoming a black belt and teaching that and stopping medicine, and has never regretted it, because he just said that the things you would see on a daily basis, that there is no way that wouldn't affect you. If it didn't affect you, that would be more of a worry, because what person is prepared to see all that every day?
Well, some people think that there's a piece of ice in the heart of all doctors, because otherwise you couldn't cut people open or listen to their misery or whatever. And I think to a certain extent that is true, because there's a level of detachment in me that at one level I have benefited from in my work, but also I sort of regret as a person, because it's beyond a certain level one can feel too austere, that things should touch one more than they do. But compared, as I started to say, compared with some branches of medicine, child psychiatry, very few of the patients die, very few. And although a lot of them are having pretty terrible lives, if you can do something by either treating them individually or altering their circumstances, at least you've helped. So I think if you have a job whereby people benefit a bit, it'll do.
I think it's got to be hugely psychologically helpful to be trying to do something every day that helps people who are in trouble.
Yes, and often the weird thing about doing child psychiatry for me was that so often nobody had ever actually talked to the children, listened to them.
Yeah, so no one had sat down and taken the time.
No.
It's funny you say that. We sit here, we talked about this before we plugged in to start recording, that even doing this now is not a thing most people do, sitting opposite somebody and uninterrupted talking. It's come up with a few of the podcasts I've done that afterwards people have said to me that I've not sat down and talked to someone for that long in I can't remember when. And you you think about it, most people don't do it. There's always something going on.
The other thing is that quite often I go into schools to talk to teachers about a particular child, and it bothered me that a child can sit in front of a teacher for a year, and I know more about the child after half an hour than the teacher did. And I don't say that against the teachers, but the fact is that kids don't get listened to in schools. They really don't. I'm
trying to think of talking one-on-one to a teacher and it's being told off as well. It's being sent to the headmaster's office for a bollocking would be about the only time you would actually talk one-to-one.
Well, perhaps the system doesn't allow it, but I think it's a shame.
If I ask you to speculate, this is impossible, but to attempt it might be worth something. We've talked about the most vulnerable kids in this lockdown, that maybe they rely on school for their meals even, so those are the most difficult. But the potential psychological effects of all this time being taken away from kids, babies not being hugged, children not. Do you have any kind of idea of what you think the harmful effects of all this could be for the kids?
Well, I guess I would want it to sound more balanced than harmful, because although, yes, certainly there'll have been huge levels of deprivation of certain parts of the child's life, but it also has been quite enhancing in other aspects of a child's life, because children are having to rub along with their parents in the same four walls, as it were, as never before, because too many fathers say, oh well, I want to provide for my children, so they work 7 days a week and the kids hardly see them, and the kids get loads and loads of goodies, but that's arguably not as enriching as having dad around. And I think a lot of fathers particularly will have discovered that it's actually rather nice to see a lot of one's children.
Yeah. What I've noticed with mine is that the more time you spend with them, the more you enjoy spending time with them. And I think the dads I know that work late and might kind of kiss a child on the head and then see it at the weekend, it's easy to get into that state where you don't know how to spend time with them. So they'll then, a lot of them will end up then going and playing cricket on a Saturday and going off and doing something on a Sunday, and it becomes not a question of not being able to spend time with the kids, but almost they don't want to do it because they don't know how to. And I'm sure that's not an absolute thing, but that's sort of been my experience of it, that you get used to it, you get good at it, you get on better with each other.
Also, I think, provided it doesn't wreck the relationship, I think a lot of marital relationships will be deeper as a result of all this.
A lot of divorces as well.
Well, indeed, a lot of divorces. I don't blind myself to that, but particularly with my private practice, where living in the peripheries of London, one would see families where the father would go off to the city and he'd leave on the 8 o'clock train or earlier and get back on the 8 o'clock train or later, and he'd play golf at the weekend, and those children just didn't see the fathers. And if I said to somebody in a naive way, well look, you're earning a lot of money, but how about if you earned less and left at 4 o'clock, say, or 5 o'clock in order to be home? And they would try to explain to me that city life just doesn't work like that, that if you're not seen to be at your desk for 12 hours a day, somebody will get preference over you and you lose status within the firm. But I think now, because of the lockdown, people working from home, I don't think it'll be possible to go back to that level of ridiculous overcommitment to city jobs.
Well, that was my experience in the newsroom. For years I would start at 6 in the morning, and if you start at 6 in the morning, if you've done a decent day by 2-3 in the afternoon, but no one, if you're ambitious, you stay, and people are out staying each other, and staying, doing 12, 13-hour days.
Yes, because you daren't be the last one to leave.
Yeah, because you don't want to be the one standing up and leaving. Oh, part-timer. And I think one of the good things that hopefully will come of this is I think hopefully most people had seen it, that was a nonsense anyway.
Yeah.
But if it can eat into that nonsense, who can stay at their desk the longest, who can see the least of their family, who can have the least of a normal life.
The other thing is, a slightly indelicate thing to say perhaps, is that lots of executives junketing around the world to have conferences about absolutely nothing, and perhaps taking advantage of making other relationships whilst
So the
they're
old
away.
second family, yeah.
Yeah, but, I think in the future they will need a jolly good excuse not to do it by Skype or.
I've made so many trips abroad that really didn't need to be made.
I say nothing about your second family.
Yeah, my second. I think about the second family a lot, because you hear about these people and you think, is one family not enough hassle for you? You know what I mean? And the lies that you'd never be able to
the
relax.
amount of energy they must put into it.
You must sort of be thinking, I just want one of them to find out. I just want to pick a family.
But bizarrely, there are lots of cases where people seem to have second families within the same borough, and how they never meet. I guess there are lots of blind eyes were turned, but
yeah, you have to think that family number one is kind of thinking, oh God, thank God he's off with the other lot. We've got a bit of peace.
yes, well, I think
They sort of
I
know.
think they're rather, as used to be with the upper classes. I think people were relieved that they didn't have to do that particular bit of duty. They could get
Someone else is taking care of it for you. But yeah, second families aside, I think the pointless foreign travel, queuing up for planes to go off to places to have a meeting, come home. Why did now you've got the excuse not to do it?
I begin to wonder whether aeroplane travel will ever fully recover, because being in an aluminium cylinder and somebody sneezing, however often they claim to clean the air in a plane, you just have a nasty feeling everybody's going to get whatever it is they've had.
Yeah, we knew it was bad for you in lots of ways before.
It wasn't just the red eye, it was everything else.
So staying put from now.
Well, I suppose it will get back to something like where it was, but no time soon, I think. The other thing is that there's a lot of talk about, when they've discovered the vaccine. Well, they're not going to do that anytime soon. If they do, it'll take 2 years to test. And if you think how long it is since the big pharma started to work on a vaccine for AIDS, it's 17 years now, and nothing, they haven't found anything. So they won't necessarily find anything. And if they do, the little beasts develop at such a rate that it'll be redundant by next Tuesday.
It's funny though that we go back a few months and we can now look back and think how good everything was in that we didn't have this to worry about. But it's not like we ever said things are good, because that's not how people work. We were complaining about, there were always things to complain about. It was people constantly rang about Brexit, whichever people cross on either side. Doesn't matter which side you're on. It's something for people to be cross about. If I look back on, so you look, the news stories that happened the last few years, when things are relatively good, we're complaining because house prices are too high. There's never a point at which you're saying things are okay, and then suddenly a real problem, something big and new comes along, and we focus all our attention on that, and we realise the others. We didn't need to worry about that other stuff at all. And I think my profession has a lot to answer for. Having spent years as a news journalist, I genuinely thought that it was very important to be informed as I saw it. If you're working in a newsroom every day, you'll know far more than everyone else about what's going on in the world, because it's your job. It's your job to know it. But does it actually add to your understanding of the world? Does it actually deepen your knowledge as a human being when all you're doing is having updates on rows and problems? Really, you're covering people dying here, you're covering this election here, you're covering all these things, which they're things happening or they're people arguing, but do they make you understand the world any better? Do they make you a person who's better able to set an example to your children, or is it just angry noise? I think most of it's angry noise, and I think it's not good for you.
It's not good for you, but I quite take the point that journalists make that, if you write 20 million people drove home safely today, that's not news, that's not even faintly interesting. But a smash on a motorway that causes a dozen deaths, that's rivetingly interesting.
It is. It's interesting, but it's entertainment. I think this is what we don't like to admit. Yeah, I'm not saying they should go and do that. No planes crashed today. Good news, because that's not what they're set up to do, and the business would fail immediately. But we think we're doing it because this is stuff you need to know. But really, what they're doing it's titillation. It's even when it's about horrible things happening, it's entertainment. That's what both either people making the news, the people reading it, don't want to admit. If you're sitting there watching Newsnight, you're being a sort of clever person, watching a clever person's TV show and informing yourself about the world. But really it's just entertainment for you, because you're going on there to watch a row, you're going on there often for people to feel righteous indignation about things they don't like. If you don't need to know these things other than for your own kind of entertainment, what are you doing it for?
Well, I think this rather brings me back to COVID, because I wrote a rather polemic letter to the Times, which mercifully they didn't publish. Right at the beginning of all this, the world had gone from mere overreaction to mass hysteria, because, we were fortunate that this particular bug didn't affect young people like the one in 1918 did. This affected only the people who were old and infirm. And frankly, we've wrecked the economy and made people miserable in order to save a fairly tiny percentage of the population.
We've wrecked the economy to an extent that we have no idea yet how deeply, people
we have, we just daren't admit it.
Well, exactly. But we know it's incredibly bad, but we just don't know whether it's being sucked into a black hole bad.
But if the government or governments are going to print money, we could end up with a Weimar Republic, because runaway inflation is a sort of obvious consequence of that.
Yeah, I mean, they're I heard on the news today that I accidentally listened to people are talking about it being worse than all of these.
Yes.
All of the wars and hyperinflation and money in wheelbarrows that we've seen in before our time, worse than all that, because of a decision to save people that
are going out anyway.
Yes.
Well, my letter to the Times included the fact that people of my generation, we've lived our lives, we're all older than we ought to have been anyway, and I ended up by saying, if I'm not to survive this, then so be it, because I think it's inappropriate to ruin everybody's lives because of this. Particularly the young people who are going to have to pay the pensions and the taxes and everything that the government will need to keep the place running.
Do you think it speaks to a sort of squeamishness and a dishonesty that we can't admit that it's okay for people to die?
Oh, exactly, yes. I think it's exactly that. I mean, obviously it's sad, but everybody's got to die sometime.
Well, that's it. It's sad, but it being sad doesn't mean you set the whole world on fire. There was this awful, you should never, I want to say that, I said this to you before, I want to repeat it, and I don't want it to sound like I'm making light of a relatively young person dying, but there was one story that in the early days of this COVID, when we were just getting a grip on how bad it was or wasn't going to be, it was generally very old people dying. And then one of the newspaper websites I looked at had made this big thing about a young man dying. It was a man in his 40s. And your eyes drawn to it because you're thinking, okay, maybe this thing's worse than we thought. And then you read 7th, 8th paragraph into the story that he'd been given 2 years to live 22 months previously, which, it's terrible. I mean, a young man died, but this was a young man who, you have to be honest about it, was dying anyway. And so if you're kind of robbing people of weeks, months of life, when who knows how much life's going to be lost in the chaos of joblessness and so forth.
Medicine has a system called NICE, whereby a committee of doctors decides on broad principles whether an expensive medicine is worth it. And the fact that some vastly expensive medicine may save somebody's life prolong somebody's life for a few months, then NICE will say, sorry, we can't afford that. We're not saying it doesn't work, we're saying it isn't worth it. And I think NICE should have been applied to this whole COVID thing, because frankly I don't think it's been worth it. Okay, instead of the usual 20,000 people dying of ordinary flu, maybe 3 or 4 times that number, but so be it. At least the country would have continued to run, and the population as a whole wouldn't have been affected.
I think what I've tried to do, I mean the general thrust of doing this podcast in what I've tried to do with all the guests I've had is I want it to be a positive thing, and I want to kind of look at things that we can all do to make ourselves as healthy and happy as possible. So I personally try not to get cross about decisions that have been made. I mean, it's hard to avoid, because really for all of us as individuals, we're just in this situation, and we have to make sure that us and our families can get through it.
Also, the capacity for human beings to predict the future is so feeble that it's hardly worth making the effort. My mother used to say that she felt very guilty having me in the war, because I was born in a war-torn part of the country during an air raid, or so she says. And I'm now in my late 70s, and my generation has been just ridiculously fortunate, in the sense that we've had free education, free university, we had no sexually transmitted diseases when those things were important to us, and we've always had jobs. So, somebody saying, when I was born, you poor thing, what a terrible world you've come into, they don't know. It's all speculation, really, and fairly pointless. I don't know whether you've read Hans Rosling's book about
factfulness. I have, yes, yeah.
And it's fascinating because he takes a positive view of everything, not just because it's his opinion, but because he's measured things, and he has recognised the fact that people always think things used to be terrible, and things are still pretty terrible now, and it simply doesn't bear out the facts at all.
It's a great book. It's a great book that for just laying down, okay, politically you can never say things are good, because everyone's like, well, what about this poor person? What about this terrible thing? But someone soberly saying, actually, we're not doing that badly. Things have improved a great deal. It's a book I would recommend to anyone. The only problem being you have to look at everything now in the context of what's happened in the last few months.
Well, except he would say, okay, people say it's been absolutely terrible, the world wars and so forth, but statistically fewer people have died in conflict, even counting those wars, than ever before. Because, if you look at a country like England, everywhere was a castle. I mean, this town that we're talking in now had a castle. There were actual local wars and people killing each other. And now, Europe has been peaceful for decades in a way that was unthinkable before. So, there's a lot of horrible things happening in the Middle East and so forth, but relatively speaking, they're tiny numbers compared with the past.
Yeah, it's a question, I suppose the question is whether we always have a capacity to mess things up at some stage, and maybe this is our way of messing it up.
Well, there is certainly a certain relish in bad news. At a terrible level, it was entertainment, as you were saying earlier in this conversation.
I had 2 moments in the newsroom that meant I had to leave at some point. First was personal. I remember seeing that came through on the news wires that her ship had sunk. And, and it was the middle of the night, nothing was happening, and we sort of, oh, something's happened. Next line, no casualties. And I remember sort of going, and I think this is awful. This is people not having died.
Yeah.
And then there was another time when there was the news editor. He wasn't the regular editor, but he was the kind of Sunday editor, I think. And it was when we were losing someone every day, pretty much in Afghanistan, so back 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And a reporter came up with a sheet of paper and sort of said, got this story for you, and he said, what is it? Someone killed in Afghanistan, and he sort of went, oof, so what? Because it's every day. And he went, his twin brother was killed last week, and the editor went, excellent. And I think you talk about the medical profession, needing that ice so they can get through the job. In the newsroom, people are delighted when bad stuff, because that's their job. That's what bad stuff happens. Good day. And that's not a good way to look at the world, is it?
It's not. I mean, bringing it back to my own profession, and you're speculating how things might be for children. I had a practice in the army area of Aldershot, and so I would often see children who'd come back from war-torn parts of the country where their father had been serving. And the thing that struck me again and again was how resilient the kids were. Okay, so, you don't go out that way because you get shot or there are landmines, so you play in this place. And children's capacity to adapt to ghastly situations is astonishing. Or if you look at old footage of slum children, they can always find places to play and joy. I remember I was brought up in a place where there'd been serious bomb damage, and bomb sites were fascinating places to play. We loved it, finding the shrapnel. And
is it true that across the board in your profession that you would see, I'm trying to think of a more elegant way of putting it, but children that don't have difficulties, but they're on paper their lives are perfect, but because there's no struggle, because there's no difficulty, because there's no adversity, problems can kind of spring up like that. It's almost as if you need a bit of adversity to keep you honest.
It's certainly true that you don't get anorexia where there's not enough food.
Yeah, that's the kind of that. I guess that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Sort of thing.
I think one of the things that you conclude from a job like mine is that over-managing children is a serious form of abuse. Is the wrong word, but ill use of children.
Over-managing them, so helicoptering.
Exactly. Yeah, and inculcating the belief that achievement is everything, and the fact that life is much more rounded than that is what they ought to be learning. That okay, you failed this exam or you've not pleased this teacher, so what, really? I think it's, if children come home and say, my teacher said this, and I think it's really life enhancing for parents to say, oh well, try and please the teacher, but let's not get too upset about this. The child who gets punished at school and comes home and is punished by the parents, that's not good. Is it true, do you think as well, that you shouldn't, if they've achieved something, you shouldn't overplay how pleased you are about that? Oh, I'm so pleased you've done this thing, because then they sort of latch onto that and think that's how to please you. Is that, does it work with praise and with... Well, I think I have slightly mixed feelings about this, because I remember my wife knowing somebody who was not the prettiest girl on the block, but she was American and she'd been brought up to think that she was beautiful. And at one level, she thought she was. She knew she wasn't, but she had such self-belief that it carried her through. And okay, that seemed to work for her, but I think for too many children, if they do a nice picture, I think parents should say, that's nice, darling, and, stick it on the side of the fridge until it drops off a couple of days later. But, to make the child feel that he's the next Picasso isn't doing the child any good.
The other way, you end up being one of those outtakes on the X Factor. Have you ever seen those where there's someone they build? It's not a show I watch, but where they build someone up and they show the family talking what a wonderful singer they are, and then you cruelly finally get to this person who's awful, and it's fascinating TV.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't like those shows, but those are the only bits that I think are fascinating, where someone's terrible, and their family is willing to go on camera telling them that they've got the best voice ever, and you feel bad. That they needed telling, they needed telling. They could have done something else. A comedian said something about overweight people during COVID, that when it came out that being fat was up to your chances of dying. He said, if only they'd had some warning that this was bad for you. If only someone had said something.
Yeah. There has been a sort of backlash from the overweight.
Backlash what?
People promoting it, and seriously overweight actresses finding fame by glorying in their obesity.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I think there has been some exaggeration of the benefits of being slim. I mean, just as an example, if you take the Queen Mother's always overweight, considerably overweight, but she lived off a pint of gin and allegedly, and not till 102, was she? Not
only gin, apparently she would be brought gin and dubonnet, so booze with more booze in it, whilst still in bed. Which I just think
an
sounds...
example to us all.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I'm not getting out of bed until I'm a little bit drunk. I think that's a brilliant way to start the day.
And she wore 4-inch heels until the day she died. Never fell over, as far as I'm concerned.
If you live into your hundreds, who can argue that it's been bad for you?
Well, my mother, who lived to about that age, when anybody criticised her diet, she said, well, I seem to have lasted this long, so I must be doing something right.
Yeah, I think it's about honesty, really, because honesty and cruelty, because with overweight people, you don't need to be mean to anyone, you don't need to shout at anyone in the street, but on the other side, we can't pretend it's good for you. You can't pretend it's good for you to be hugely overweight.
The other thing is, I think people are simplistic about it, because I have heard quite authoritative people saying that obesity isn't genetic, that it's learned behaviour. I simply don't believe that. I think some people have, as it were, fat genes.
Do you?
Yeah.
But you can always overcome things, right?
Well, there are no fat people in Belsen. Yeah, everybody can be skinny if they eat practically nothing. But some people put weight on disastrously easily, whereas others, myself included, I could eat like a horse until I was well into my middle age, and then suddenly you can't do that any longer. But I got away with it for so long.
I think I think being nice and understanding of each other, but
perhaps we just are too judgmental, really.
As a people,
yeah,
I think we are judgmental. Yeah. I think we are judgmental, and I think it's something on a personal level we all need to catch ourselves doing it, because I think it's a natural reaction. You judge people who do things differently to you, and
we have
find
words
yourself
for it, like
doing
gossip. We think gossip's just chattering about other people to their detriment when they're not listening. But it's pernicious, really. I mean, I do it, but it's not an attractive trait.
I've tried very hard not to do it, because it's a comforting thing to
slag off.
To slag something or someone.
Well, it feels harmless, but I think it's probably not a becoming mindset, really.
No, I think it's not good. I think we have to be positive. Well, I want to talk finally about some positive things we can all do. I finally got you to do some yoga, right? About a year ago, did you start? Something like that.
I think we did it for about a year and a half.
And you didn't like it because you're a doctor, and a lot of I do yoga, and there's a lot of chat about things that don't exist within the body as far as the medical profession.
That was my difficulty.
Yeah.
I think if I'd come to it without medical knowledge, I'd have been more comfortable with it. But so much of it was plainly nonsense.
But I think you do have to ignore some of the talking. I think the exercises they do are very good for the body, and the breathing is very good for the mind, and
Well,
the two together
it seemed
work
to me to
extremely
be
well.
I was brought up by heavily Christian parents, and although I have now come to think that most of it was silly fairy stories, the fact is that the Christian way of life has a lot to commend it. It's a worthy way to live. And similarly with yoga, I felt that the exercises and the attitudes and the discipline were worthy. What I didn't like was all the rubbish, as I would say, that was said to underpin it. In the same way that a lot of fairy tales underpin the Christian story. What we need is the essence rather than the background.
There's a lot of similarity. I think if you spend half an hour in a good posture, feeling grateful for your life and breathing and clearing your mind, you could be praying to whichever God you believe in, or you could be doing yoga, and it will be very beneficial for you.
The thing I found most valuable was the body awareness that came with it. The backlash was that I've never felt so critical of my own body until I started to do yoga.
But that's a good thing.
Well,
I think
indeed.
that's a good thing, because
my complacence was overcome.
One of the best things they do is they make you take a scan of your body, and any tightness, any pain, just notice it without judging. Because I think if you stop, my knee hurts, you focus on it, it gets worse. If you just allow it to be. How were you with the expression breathing into? Because they ask you to breathe into a certain part of your body, which is meaningless in that you obviously can't put the breath.
Well, I found it useful. I had done some work with hypnosis in the past, and there's a lot of overlap with hypnosis in terms of concentrating on particular parts of the body. I mean, one of the techniques in hypnosis is, in inducting somebody, you get them to concentrate on their hand and suggest to them that they're feeling pins and needles and it's getting light and the hand goes up. And if they're good hypnotic subjects, that is what happens. You feel a bit of a chump if they're not, and it doesn't. But anyway, but I found with yoga that having to think oneself into particular parts of the body was actually quite a useful exercise.
I think all the stuff about the chakras and the bandhas, I mean, this is done long before we had the anatomical knowledge we have now, and I think they were just attempts to explain without knowing what may or may not be going on, and I think they should maybe tailor it for a modern audience and do the stuff that doesn't jar with someone who knows that you perhaps don't have 5 bandhas.
But again, in comparison with religion, that God created the world in 7 days, or whatever it was. It's mockable now, but they didn't know all that stuff then. So, it was a not unreasonable way of primitive people to explain the way the world might have come into being. And different religions had different stories. And similarly, I think the yoga goes so far back that they had to have explanations for why bits of the body felt as if they had different functions, and I accept that. It's just that I think it would be sensible to de-emphasize some of that now.
Yeah, I think they could do with updating some of the language, but I don't know, someone who's had lots of injuries, I've found yoga amazing. And I learned something new about it the other day, which is we tend to look at someone doing yoga, say someone who's really good at it, they're not supposed to say, he's been doing it for a long time, he's very flexible. You think, look at these amazing things this person could do that they've managed to achieve. But then you look at a child and they can do that stuff naturally. So you're not achieving some outer worldly thing that your body's not supposed to be doing. You're just returning it to a state when it was less fucked up than it is now. You're just pulling your body back to flexibility, and you're not contorting it, you're relaxing it into how it should be, because your body should be able to but it started off being able to fold, and you'd be able to open your hips wide and to have loose limbs. That's how it started off. We just spend our life far too sedentary and far too knotted up about various things, and it gradually goes, and the reason people find it difficult depends how long you've left it.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned Picasso earlier in this conversation. Picasso spent all his life trying to get back to the truths of the way children draw.
Right.
But I remember I was in hospital when I was a small boy and was doing some drawings, and I wanted to take them home with me, but it was a fever hospital, so I wasn't allowed to. And I was desperate I'd drawn a bus and I was desperate because this was the best bus I'd ever drawn. And the nurse said, but you've done the big front wheels big and the back wheels small, and buses don't look like that at all. And suddenly I could see that it was a crap drawing.
Oh, ruined it. And that day
the scales fell from my eyes and it was revealed to be a child's drawing, and I wasn't ready for it.
And it ruined it for you, or?
Well, I have mixed feelings. It's a bit like learning about Santa Claus. You need to know that stuff. It's a bit of a shock when it happens.
Yeah, I think sort of telling people they can and can't do things is tough. I have a friend who my age, and he draws now and is brilliant at it. Draws cartoons and everything, but he at age 13, a teacher just said, you told him he was rubbish, and he just stopped. He was drawing all these amazing cartoons as a child, got told he was rubbish by a teacher, stopped, and went off and
I think the best way of being
office job
directly learning things when you're a child is from your contemporaries, because if your friend says you're crap at drawing, it's an objective view. Whereas if a teacher or a parent offers an opinion, whether, as you were saying earlier, they're praising it to the skies, even though the child at some level realises that it's not that good, I think children accept what the group thinks much more readily than having input from adults.
Well, we have to hope through all this nonsense. Well, whatever happens to the economy, we'll muddle. We always find a way of muddling through, don't we?
Well, I am an incurable optimist. I think if England had been the only one with an appalling situation with this wretched virus, it would be really catastrophic. But the whole of the Western world, or indeed the whole of the world, is in the same situation, and I somehow feel that it's still a level playing field.
Yeah, I suppose, exactly. That's what all being in the same boat, I think, is useful.
Yeah.
Because, if it was one country, it would be basket case, wouldn't it?
Yes,
because you'd be having to compete with everyone who was fine.
Yeah, but we're all the same. And I think, I would say this, but I think Brits are actually quite a resilient bunch.
Yeah, definitely we are. Okay, good. That's ending on a positive note.
Yes.
Dr. Donald Holt, Dad, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to what was almost certainly the longest ever uninterrupted chat I've had with my dad. And the fact that we were recording meant he had to behave himself, which was great. That excellent book we talked about is called Factfulness by Hans Rousing. It's a really good kind of sobering look at what the world's really like from someone who knows the figures rather than what grubby media types like me would have you believe. We talked about things our wives make us do at the beginning. I'm going to be making more effort with social media and updating at Healthy Beast Podcast on Instagram. There will also be a new Healthy Beast podcast every Friday starting next week with my friend MMA fighter Nathan Mr. Bag and Tag Jones. He'll be talking about his fighting career, but also he's just become a dad and coping with being a fighter and a personal trainer on lockdown. Can't be easy. It's not easy for any of us, but when your job involves close personal contact, must be almost impossible. I know he's doing a load of Zoom stuff, but I'm going to find out exactly what he's up to and how he's training and how his life's going next Friday. See you then.